these models. We're going to be looking at different models and theories, big ideas that we've touched on in human geography, maybe a couple things that we haven't yet. So the first one is the demographic transition model. I'll zoom in on this. Remember that we're looking at a few different things in the demographic transition model. We're looking at birth rates, we're looking at death rates, we're looking at the change in population. So in stage 1, we have, you could say it's highly stationary, meaning it's not population isn't changing that much. The total population, as you can see here on the red line, is relatively stable. Why is that? Well, there are a lot of births. There's no birth control. There's no contraceptives. People aren't living in cities, and so they don't have any reason to not have a lot of kids. There are a lot of births, but there's also a lot of deaths. People are dying from famine, malnutrition, wild animals. Remember, this is the earliest stage of a society. There are no countries in stage 1 currently. There are a few remote groups. I think tribes in the Amazon would probably fit into this category, but there are currently no countries still in this stage. Looking at stage 2, this is where population starts to expand, it starts to grow. Why is that occurring? The birth rate's actually not really changing. There's still a lot of people living in rural places. There's still a lot of incentive for having many kids. You have kids to help out on the farm. You have kids to take care of you when you're older. And coupled with that, there is really not a lot of knowledge about birth control or access to it. There's also usually cultural factors that promote having more kids, especially if you're in a cultural context that values male offspring a lot. If you have 3 girls, you're not going to stop right there. You're going to keep having kids until you have a male. And we definitely saw examples of that where the father or the mother-in-law was really insistent upon that, even if the mother, who has to do all the hard work, did not want to have another kid. So the birth rate is staying the same, but the death rate decreases, and that's why the total population is expanding so quickly. What are some countries that you could say are in stage 2? You could say that Egypt, Kenya, and India are in stage 2, really moving into stage 3 at this point. But the birth rate's high, the death rate falls rapidly. The natural increase rate is a very rapid increase. That's basically the speed at which the population grows. And again, why is the birth rate changing or not changing in this case? Children are needed for farming. Many children die at an early age. I didn't mention that part. As we've gone over before, if you sadly expect one of your children to pass away, then if you want 4 kids, you're going to try to have 5 kids, or you're going to try to have 6 kids. And so inevitably, not every family does lose a child. And so what you have as a result is a lot of large families, a lot of families that are larger even than they may have intended to be. And that's as a result of a high infant mortality rate. And one other thing to keep in mind, even if that infant mortality rate starts to go down, which fortunately we are seeing in a lot of parts of the world due to access to medicine increasing, people urbanizing and being closer to hospitals, more hospital births. If we see that go down, that's really good, but that might not necessarily change the culture. So people still are used to having a lot of kids. There are also religious and social encouragement to have large families, and again, no family planning. Changes in death rates in stage 2 really occur because of improvements in medical care. clean water, better sanitation, and lower infant mortality rate. Okay, now in stage 3, this is where we see an even greater increase in population. Part of that is due to just demographic momentum, which is the idea that, okay, if I have 4 kids and my kids each have 4 kids, without even changing the uh, maternity rate, the number of children that each woman is expected to have, the population continues to grow because I'm still alive, my 4 kids are still alive, and each of their 4 kids are still alive. And so in this time span, in my lifetime, you know, the population is going to continue to grow. Now, and that only really changes once the older populations start to die out. But in stage 3, we do see the death rate continue to decrease, but it's not decreasing as much. Why is that? Because there's only so much you can do. If you introduce clean water, you can save a lot of lives, right? But people are going to die at some point. And so in a country that's in stage 3 that has reached that level of development, lives are still going to continue to be saved by advances in medicine, but not as many. Not many more, I should say. So the natural increase rate is slowing down a little bit. Birth rates changing. This is where we actually see a big change in the birth rate. So you should know that in stage 3, total population continues to grow. Death rates continue to drop, but not as dramatically. But the most dramatic thing that does happen in stage 3 is those birth rates begin to fall. Why is that? One is improved medical care and diet. So we have lower infant mortality. And remember, lower infant mortality means families aren't necessarily going to try and overcompensate, because once they can expect that all 3 of their kids are going to survive, then they may decide, okay, we're going to stop having kids. We have 3 kids, and that's what we want. And fewer children are needed too. In these stage 3 countries, we see more and more populations moving into the city. And if you're living in a city, a child is not going to be helpful because you're not on a farm. You don't need extra hands around. You might work in an office. You might work in a factory. Guess what? You can't take your kids to work in those locations. They're not a benefit. In fact, they cost more money in the city, because you got to think about housing. You know, how many kids can fit in that apartment that you've moved into in Buenos Aires or Rio de Janeiro, we're talking about Brazil, which is our example here for stage 3. And as far as reasons for the change in the death rate, improvements in medical care, water supply, and sanitation, fewer children are dying, better access to life-saving technology like radiation or chemotherapy. But again, you know, if people are living longer, they live up to their 60s maybe, they're still going to at some point pass away. Okay, stage 4, we have low stationary, meaning it's kind of stabilizing again, like it was in stage 1, which is kind of interesting. It's almost like coming full circle. But the result of all this demographic change is that, we now have a lot of people, right? So our total population, as you can see up here, is very high. The natural increase rate has slowed down a lot, meaning the population is still growing a little bit, but very slowly. A big part of that is that the birth rate is way down, but another big part of that is that we're not decreasing the death rate very much anymore. Okay, there's good health care, there's a reliable food supply, so the death rate is low, but we're not really doing much to get it down even lower. And then in stage 5, which this chart that we're looking at is a little bit older, theoretically, or supposedly stage 5 is theoretical, but really it's not. I mean, we are seeing these things happening. And Germany is a good example. Birth rate very low, or actually, and when we say low, we mean negative, right? So you got two people who are together, married or living together. If they have 2 kids, then that's essentially it's going to be a birth rate of 0. But if they have 1 kid, that's going to be a negative birth rate because they are contributing to, in some sense, the decline of a population. And so population could actually get smaller. Why are we seeing so few kids? Family planning, good health, improving status of women. So if women, and this is a good thing obviously, if women are pursuing careers or higher education, they're less likely to start a family early. And if they're less likely to start a family early, then they're likely to have fewer kids, right? If a woman waits until she's 40 when she decides to start having kids, she's probably not going to go on to have 4, 5, 6 kids. She might have 1 or 2 kids in that time period and then decide that that's all she wants. Or she may forego having kids completely to focus on her career. And of course, people are getting married later and starting families later. Okay, so that's the demographic transition model. It's going to help us understand the epidemiological transition model. Think about the different causes of death in each stage. And it also just helps us to understand how developed a country is, the kind of economic activity a country might be doing. You know, a stage 2 country is not going to have a lot of industrialization. It's not going to have a lot of people working in factories. Certainly not going to have a lot of people working in offices. It's going to have a lot of people working in agriculture. Stage 5 country, which has a declining population, it's going to have some concerns. It's going to be concerned about ensuring there are enough people for the workforce. And so that might enter into discussions about migration. A country like Germany needs to promote migration, immigration, people coming in, because they need people to fill those jobs. Okay, let's go on down to the gravity model. The gravity model holds that the interaction between 2 places can be determined by the product of the population of both places. So adding the population of those 2 places together, we'll say we've got 2 cities. You add that population together, dividing by the square of their distance from one another. Now that seems like some complicated math. It's really pretty simple math. But here's what it means. It means that the primary implication of the model is that distance is not the only determining factor in the interaction between 2 cities. Now, it might seem like a jump, but let me explain what the gravity model tells us. If you take a bunch of different cities and you compare 2 cities to each other, what you will find, or you do the gravity model calculation, what you will find is that 2 big cities are more like that are 100 miles apart are going to have a greater connection to each other than 2 small cities that are 100 miles apart from each other. So the size of the city by population, it matters. It's going to impact how connected that city is to another city. Why? Well, you've got more people. That's more people to be able to connect with another city. Another practical reason is that bigger cities have uh, bigger companies. Bigger cities have greater access to things like internet. Bigger cities have bigger airports. So there's more connection that's going to occur between large places, places with large populations, than small places. And that's the essential idea behind the gravity model. So, big idea, it's not just about how far apart places are. There might be more interaction between New York and Los Angeles than there is between Bucksnort, Tennessee and Atlanta. Bucksnort, Tennessee, just east of here near the Tennessee River, is very tiny town. I don't even know how many people are there. Very small. But it is much closer to Atlanta than LA and New York are. But because of the sizes of those populations, because of the clout of those cities, there's a much greater deal of interaction between them, even though they're further apart. Okay, so Zelinsky was a geographer, major thinker, studied under another geographer named Carl Sauer. What you need to know about him is he came up with this perceptual regions of North America. And you don't necessarily have to memorize those, but you should know that he's the one that developed this map. And some of these we talk about all the time: the South, the Southwest, the Midwest, the West. But others won't be as familiar to you, like the Northwest or the Pacific. You've probably heard Pacific Northwest, but what about the Pacific, which would be a large portion of coastal California? You've heard of New England, but what about Atlantic or East Canada or Middle Atlantic? The big idea behind this, of course, is that there are perceptual regions, and these are based on what people put together in their own mind. And this is really one person's opinion. He would say he based it on a lot of different evidence. But at the end of the day, if you decide that that Kentucky is not part of the South, uh, that's your perception of it. But this is going to be a map that a lot of people would kind of understand or start to agree with. And it's based on a lot of different factors.